Ever wish you could like snag a crash course in negotiation straight from somebody who's, facing down a global superpower? Well, get this. Today's deep dive is basically doing just that. We're taking a look at Volodymyr Zelensky, not just as a wartime leader, but as a master of diplomacy.
It's fascinating how much we can learn from figures like Zelensky, even outside the realm of war and politics, really.
Exactly. We've got this blog post that breaks down his diplomatic techniques. And the really cool part is, well, it argues that these skills, they apply to all of us in our daily lives. It's not just about international relations. It's about understanding human dynamics and persuasion and negotiation stuff we all deal with.
Absolutely. These aren't just skills for presidents and diplomats. They're really fundamental to navigating human interaction. And who better to learn from than someone facing such incredibly high stakes, right?
Okay, so let's unpack this. The blog starts by painting this picture of Zelensky walking a tightrope. He desperately needs support from the U.S. and the EU, but at the same time, he's dealing with some, shall we say, strong personalities. Remember the whole situation with Donald Trump?
Yeah. It's crucial to understand the historical context here. U.S.-Ukraine relations have always been incredibly complex. You have Ukraine strategically positioned between Russia and the West, and this creates a very delicate balancing act that Zelensky has to navigate.
And this leads us to the first big lesson from the blog, what they call the ego game. What's fascinating is that it highlights how crucial it is to consider the ego. Especially when you're dealing with powerful people, you can't just ignore that element.
Right, exactly. The blog argues that to be effective, you have to speak the language of the ego to understand and appeal to the motivations and sensitivities of the person that you're trying to persuade.
And they give a really interesting example of this. They talk about Zelensky tailoring his messages to resonate with American values, like he'll reference historical events or draw parallels to things that have a deep emotional impact on the American audience.
It's a very strategic approach to communication. By aligning his requests with deeply held American values, Zelensky makes his arguments more compelling, more persuasive.
This has me thinking. Haven't we all had to navigate someone's ego at some point? Maybe it was a boss, a client, even a family member. What were some of the ways you approached that, and what were the results?
It's definitely something we all do to some extent. The key takeaway here is that understanding the other person's perspective, their motivations, and their ego is essential to achieving your goals, whatever those goals might be.
Makes total sense. Okay, moving on to lesson number 2. Composure is king. Honestly, this is where I think Zelensky really shines. This guy has been under immense pressure. Public criticism, constant threats, you name it. But he consistently maintains his composure. What do you think it is about staying calm in these high-pressure situations that projects such strength?
It's a powerful display of self-control and resilience. Think about figures like Martin Luther King Jr. during the Birmingham campaign. His calm demeanor in the face of violence and hostility was crucial in de-escalating tensions and winning public support. There's a certain strength that comes from staying focused on your message and not allowing yourself to be rattled by external pressures.
Right, it's like that saying, never let them see you sweat.
Exactly. And often, those who lose their cool, they end up escalating the situation rather than resolving it.
That's a good point. Thinking about it, haven't we all had those moments where we lost our composure in a negotiation or a disagreement? Looking back, how do you think it impacted the situation, and what could you have done differently?
It's definitely a valuable lesson to reflect on. Taking that step back and maintaining that composure can be so much more effective than just charging ahead with emotions running high.
Totally agree. All right, let's dive into lesson number 3, build your alliances. This one really struck me because the blog points out that Zelensky doesn't just focus on the big players, like presidents and prime ministers.
Right. He recognizes that true strength comes from a broad base of support. So he's actively engaged with grassroots organizations, advocacy groups, even celebrities and influencers, really tapping into the power of a diverse network.
It's like he understands that relying solely on a handful of powerful individuals can be risky. What happens if, they change their minds or they get voted out of office?
Exactly. By cultivating this wide network, Zelensky makes himself less vulnerable to political shifts and strengthens his position on the world stage. It also gives him access to a wider range of perspectives and expertise, which can be incredibly valuable when you're navigating those complex situations.
It's a brilliant strategy, and it makes me wonder how we can apply this in our own lives, whether it's our career, our community, or even just our personal relationships. Who are our allies, and how can we build a network that gives us that kind of strength, that resilience?
It's a question worth considering. Building a strong network of support can provide us with valuable resources, advice, and, those different viewpoints that help us navigate challenges more effectively.
Such a good point. All right, on to the final lesson from the blog. And it's one that might seem obvious at first glance, but it's really about the execution. Focus on shared goals. The blog argues that Zelensky is a master at finding and emphasizing common ground, even with those who might seem like unlikely allies.
Yeah. He consistently frames the conflict in Ukraine as a defense of democracy itself. It's a fight for freedom and self-determination that resonates far beyond Ukraine's borders. This approach, it draws people in, making them feel like they're part of something larger than themselves.
It's incredibly effective. And thinking about historical examples, we've seen how shared goals can bring together even the most diverse groups. Like, look at the Allied forces in World War II. Countries with completely different histories and cultures and political systems united by the common goal of defeating fascism.
Absolutely. That shared goal transcended their differences and allowed them to achieve something truly remarkable. It's a testament to the power of finding common ground, even amidst conflict.
So this begs the question, where can we apply this principle in our own lives? Maybe it's a workplace conflict, a community issue, or even a disagreement with a family member. How can we shift the focus from an us versus them mentality to finding those shared goals that can help bridge the divide? What are some strategies we can use to do that?
It starts with empathy, really trying to understand the other person's perspective and what they're hoping to achieve. From there, it's about looking for areas of agreement, those common goals that both parties can work towards, even if their approaches differ.
Okay, so we've got these 4 powerful lessons from Zelensky's diplomatic playbook. The ego game, composure is king, build your alliances, and focus on shared goals. But the blog takes it a step further and suggests that these are actually expressions of deeper personal qualities. They mention things like emotional intelligence, resilience, adaptability, and effective communication.
It's about recognizing that these aren't just tactics. They're fundamental skills for navigating the complexities of human interaction. Whether you're dealing with world leaders or negotiating with a coworker, these skills can make a significant difference in achieving positive outcomes.
And to illustrate how these seemingly high-level diplomatic skills can be applied to everyday situations, the blog offers a really interesting example, a conflict over a community park.
It's a scenario many of us can relate to. Differing opinions on how a shared space should be used. You have one group of residents who want to build a new playground and another group who want to preserve the natural environment.
It sounds like a recipe for conflict.
Exactly. And the blog suggests applying Zelensky's approach to this situation. It starts by acknowledging and validating both sides' concerns, recognizing that both perspectives have merit. Then, it's about shifting the focus to the shared goal, improving the park for everyone.
So instead of 2 opposing sides, you've got a community working together towards a common vision.
Exactly. And by focusing on those shared goals and that open communication, it's possible to find solutions that address the needs and concerns of all parties involved.
It's a great example of how these diplomatic principles can really translate to real-world situations.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, the blog focuses primarily on Zelensky's successes. It has me wondering, are there times when this approach, might not be effective? What are the limitations, and when might we need different tactics?
Yeah, that's a really insightful question. No single approach is foolproof, and there are certainly situations where Zelensky's tactics might not yield the desired results. For instance, imagine trying to find common ground with someone who is deliberately deceptive or acting in bad faith.
Right. Or what about those situations where staying calm might be perceived as weakness? Sometimes a more assertive approach might be necessary to, establish boundaries or stand up for your principles.
Absolutely. There's a delicate balance between maintaining composure and projecting strength. And it's crucial to be adaptable, to recognize when a different approach is needed. Diplomacy is not about adhering rigidly to one set of rules. It's about understanding the nuances of human interaction and responding accordingly.
So true. It's like having a toolbox full of different tools. You wouldn't use a hammer for every job, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you need a screwdriver, sometimes a wrench. It's about choosing the right tool for the situation.
Exactly. And part of developing that diplomatic skill set is learning to discern which tool is most appropriate for a given circumstance. It requires observation, critical thinking, and a willingness to adapt.
So, dear listeners, we want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where these kinds of strategies wouldn't have worked? What other tools or tactics do you keep in your negotiation arsenal? What's worked for you and what hasn't? Share your experiences, and let's keep this conversation going.
It's through sharing our experiences and learning from one another that we can all become more effective communicators and negotiators.
Absolutely. And that's what this deep dive is all about. Not just understanding the world, but understanding how to navigate it more effectively. So, until next time, keep diving, keep learning, and keep those questions coming.